A veteran and his dog saved an old man in the woods. What he left behind changed everything. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It was a bitterly cold morning in the woods of northern Maine, where the trees stood tall like silent sentinels in the mist. The wind howled through the branches, carrying with it the scent of pine and snow. Nolan Creed, a 40-year-old former Army combat engineer, had been traveling alone for weeks, with nothing more than his old backpack and the company of his loyal dog, Ash. They had been drifting from town to town, seeking peace after the chaos of war, but peace seemed to be something Nolan could never quite find. Ash, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a coat of slate gray and cream, was more than just a dog to Nolan. He was a constant companion, a reminder of better days, and a source of unwavering loyalty. Ash had served with Nolan during his deployment, and together, they had seen more than their fair share of hardship. But now, back in the civilian world, it was just the two of them, trying to carve out a life in the quiet corners of the country. On this particular morning, as they trudged through the thick snow, a strange feeling washed over Nolan. It wasn't the usual quiet of the woods. Something felt wrong. Ash's ears perked up, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. Nolan stopped, sensing the same unease. They both listened, and in the distance, a faint sound broke the silence. It was a cry for help, weak and desperate, carried by the wind. Without hesitation, Nolan gripped the leash, tugging Ash forward. The cry came again, louder this time, and it was enough to urge him into a faster stride. They navigated through the dense trees, following the sound. It wasn't long before they found the source, an elderly man, lying on the ground, his body pinned beneath a fallen log. His face was pale, and his breathing came in shallow gasps. The man's clothes were soaked through, and the freezing cold had already begun to set in. Nolan's heart raced as he rushed to the man's side, kneeling in the snow. "Hold on. I'm here," he said softly, trying to reassure the man as he assessed the situation. Ash, ever the loyal companion, stood guard by Nolan's side, his ears trained on the surroundings. With all his strength, Nolan managed to shift the log, enough to free the man from his trap. He pulled him to safety, carefully cradling the man's head in his lap as Ash barked to alert him to any danger. The old man's eyes fluttered open, and he gasped for air, his frail hands grasping Nolan's arm in a tight grip. "You saved me," the man whispered, his voice raspy and weak. "I thought I was finished." Nolan gave him a reassuring nod. "You're safe now," he replied. As the man rested, Nolan looked around, trying to gauge their next steps. The woods were vast, and it would be a long journey to the nearest town. He would need to find shelter and warmth for both of them, but the storm was picking up, and the cold was setting in. It wasn't safe to stay here. He checked his backpack for supplies and found just enough to get them through the night, some protein bars, a blanket, and a flare gun. He would need to get the old man to shelter, and fast. But as he looked down at the man, something about the way he clutched Nolan's arm, and the glint in his eyes, made Nolan pause. There was something more to this rescue than a simple act of kindness. Little did he know, this moment would change everything for both of them. As the wind howled through the trees, Nolan and Ash trudged through the deep snow, their steps heavy and slow. The old man, whom they had just rescued from the woods, was now bundled in a blanket, resting against a large rock for support. Nolan's breath came out in sharp bursts as he scanned the area, the cold biting at his skin. It was clear that the storm was worsening, and the woods were becoming more dangerous by the minute. They needed shelter, and they needed it fast. The old man had been trapped under a log for too long, and his frailty was becoming more evident with each passing second. His voice, though faint, had a quiet urgency to it when he spoke. "I don't know how I can ever thank you. You saved my life." Nolan knelt beside him, brushing the snow from his face as he spoke softly. "It's not about thanks. You're safe now. Let's just get you somewhere warm." The man's eyes met his, filled with gratitude but also something else, something Nolan couldn't quite place. The storm was picking up, the wind howling around them, and the temperature was dropping fast. It wouldn't be long before it became unbearable, and Nolan knew they couldn't survive out here for much longer. Ash, always attentive, stood close by, his amber eyes scanning the surroundings, alert for any signs of danger. Nolan could feel the dog's instincts kicking in, just as they always had in the field. They had been through a lot together, and the bond between them was undeniable. They had been partners in the worst of times, and now, it seemed, they were going to need each other more than ever. After a few moments of silence, the old man spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know a place, not far from here. A cabin, hidden in the woods. It's been abandoned for years, but it's still standing." Nolan looked at him, eyebrows furrowed in disbelief. "A cabin?" The old man nodded slowly, his frail hands gripping the blanket around him. "Yes, but it's not just any cabin. It belongs to my family. It's been in the family for generations, but no one has lived there for a long time. My father used to take me there when I was young." Nolan's curiosity was piqued, but he didn't have time to question him further. They had to move. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and the storm was getting worse by the minute. "Do you think you can make it there?" Nolan asked. The old man nodded once more, his expression filled with determination, but Nolan could see the weariness in his eyes. "I think so," he replied, his voice hoarse. Just get me there." Without wasting another moment, Nolan helped the old man to his feet, supporting him as they started their slow trek toward the cabin. Ash led the way, his tail low and his body alert, guiding them through the dense forest. Nolan could feel the cold seeping into his bones, but he pushed through, determined to get the old man to safety. The trees loomed like silent giants around them, their branches creaking in the wind. The path was narrow, and the snow had begun to cover the trail, but Ash seemed to know exactly where they needed to go. Nolan followed closely behind, his senses heightened, aware of every creak and crack in the snow beneath his boots. The journey felt endless, the cold cutting through their clothing, but they pressed on. The old man's steps were slower now, his breath coming in labored bursts, but Nolan kept a steady pace, offering him encouragement whenever he could. Finally, after what felt like hours, they reached the cabin. It was small, tucked away in a small clearing, and it looked as though it had been untouched for years. The windows were covered in a layer of ice, and the roof had caved in slightly from years of neglect, but it was shelter. And at this point, shelter was all that mattered. Nolan helped the old man inside, and they found a small fireplace at the far end of the room. It was cold, but the cabin provided the protection they desperately needed from the storm outside. The old man collapsed onto a dusty chair, his breathing ragged. Nolan stoked the fire, doing his best to make the place as warm as possible. Ash lay beside him, his eyes watching the flames with an intensity that matched his owner's. The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin, there was a sense of quiet that allowed Nolan to catch his breath. As the fire crackled, the old man spoke once more. "This cabin, it's not just a place of shelter. It's a place of memories. My father used to tell me stories about the land here, about how the family kept a hidden treasure, passed down through generations." Nolan's curiosity deepened. "A treasure?" The old man nodded slowly, his eyes distant as if lost in the past. "Yes, a treasure that's been buried for years, hidden beneath the floorboards. My father always said it was meant to be passed down to someone who had the courage to find it." Nolan's heart raced. The storm, the journey, the rescue, it all seemed to be leading to something more. The treasure, if it existed, could change everything. But for now, he had to focus on keeping the old man warm and safe. There would be time to explore later. As the night wore on, the storm continued to howl outside, but inside the cabin, the fire burned brightly, casting flickering shadows across the walls. Nolan knew one thing for certain. This was no ordinary rescue, and the old man's story was just beginning. The fire crackled softly in the corner of the cabin, the warmth spreading through the room as the storm raged outside. Nolan sat near the hearth, keeping his eyes on the flames as they danced, while Ash lay beside him, his head resting on his paws. The old man, now wrapped in a thick blanket, sat in a chair nearby, his breathing slow but steady. The night was quiet except for the occasional howl of the wind and the soft crackle of the fire. It was the kind of silence that Nolan had grown used to after his years in the service, quiet but heavy, like something was about to happen. The old man, who had been dozing off, suddenly spoke, his voice raspy but clear. "You must be wondering about the treasure I spoke of earlier," he said, his eyes flickering to Nolan. "I know I haven't said much, but I think it's time you hear the truth." Nolan turned his attention to him, his curiosity piqued. "The treasure," he said quietly. "What is it? Why did you say it was meant for someone with courage to find it?" The old man took a deep breath, his gaze drifting toward the window as the snow continued to fall outside. "It's not just gold or jewels," he said slowly, as if the words weighed heavy on his heart. "It's something far more valuable. It's the last will of my father, something he wanted to pass on to someone who could understand its importance. My family has always had this land, and my father believed it was meant for someone who could use it for good. He hid the will, kept it locked away in a secret compartment beneath the floorboards of this cabin. He said it would reveal itself to the right person, someone who had the heart to carry on the family's legacy." Nolan's mind raced as he processed the old man's words. A hidden will? A family legacy? It was a lot to take in, especially considering the conditions they were in. The storm had isolated them in this cabin, and the warmth of the fire was the only thing keeping them alive right now. "So, you think the will is here?" Nolan asked, his voice low. The old man nodded slowly. "Yes. I've spent years trying to find it, but my health has kept me from searching properly. I've been too weak to do much of anything. And now I'm afraid time is running out." Nolan didn't say anything for a moment. The weight of the man's words hung in the air. He had come here to survive, to escape the ghosts of his past, but now he found himself in the middle of something far greater. The storm outside seemed to mirror the storm in his mind, the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Finally, he spoke. "I'll help you find it," he said. "If it's here, we'll find it. But we need to move quickly. The storm won't last forever, and we're going to need every bit of warmth we can get if we're going to survive the night." The old man smiled faintly, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered. "You're a good man." Nolan shrugged. "It's just what anyone would do. Let's get to work." The two of them stood up, with Ash following closely behind them. The fire flickered as they moved toward the center of the cabin. The old man slowly rose from his chair, his hands trembling slightly as he pointed to a small, worn section of the floorboards. "It's under there," he said. "I'm sure of it." Nolan knelt down, his hands running over the surface of the floor. It was old wood, warped from years of wear and neglect, but it still had a certain sturdiness to it. He carefully pried up a few of the planks, revealing a small compartment underneath. Inside, there was an old metal box, covered in dust and cobwebs. The box was rusted, its edges worn smooth from years of being hidden away. Nolan's heart raced as he lifted the box from its hiding place. He could feel the weight of it in his hands, the sense of something important, something that had been waiting for decades to be discovered. He set the box down on the floor, carefully opening it. Inside, there were papers, old and yellowed, their edges frayed. Nolan reached for them, his fingers trembling as he pulled the first page free. The words were faded, but they were still legible. It was a will, just like the old man had said. But as he read the words, Nolan's heart skipped a beat. The will wasn't just about land or inheritance. It was about a promise, a responsibility. The old man's father had left instructions for the person who found the will to take care of the land, to protect it, and to use it for the good of others. There were also mentions of a hidden fortune, not in gold or silver, but in the land itself, a resource that could change everything for the right person. Nolan sat back, absorbing the weight of the discovery. This wasn't just a treasure, it was a legacy, a mission. And now, it seemed, it was his mission too. He looked up at the old man, who was watching him closely. "This isn't just about you, is it?" Nolan said softly. "It's about all of us." The old man nodded, his eyes glistening with emotion. "Yes, it's about making sure the land stays in the right hands, and that it's used for good. My father knew this day would come. He knew someone would find the will, someone with the heart to carry on the legacy." Nolan stood up, his mind racing with possibilities. He had come to this cabin to escape, but now he realized that his journey had just begun. The storm outside raged on, but inside the cabin, a new sense of purpose had taken root. He had found something that could change his life, something that could make all the difference. And as he looked at the old man, he knew that whatever came next, he wasn't alone. Together, they would protect this legacy. Together, they would unlock the secrets of the land. And together, They would face whatever challenges lay ahead. The cabin was silent except for the soft crackling of the fire and the faint sound of the wind howling outside. Nolan sat in front of the hearth, the will still clutched in his hands as he mulled over the words. The weight of the old man's legacy felt heavier with each passing minute. The old man, now reclined in his chair, seemed at peace, his eyes closed as he rested. Ash lay beside Nolan, his head resting on his paws, but even the dog seemed to sense the importance of the moment. It was a legacy of responsibility, one that had been passed down through generations, and now it had found its way into Nolan's hands. As the wind continued to blow against the cabin, Nolan realized that this was more than just a treasure hunt. This was a call to action. The old man's father had known that one day, someone would have to protect the land, care for it, and use it for the greater good. But what did that mean for Nolan? He had come here to escape, to leave behind the chaos of his past, but now it seemed like his future was tangled up in this legacy. He was a man who had spent years fighting battles, both on the field and within himself, and now he was faced with a new challenge, one that involved more than just survival. He had to decide what to do with this land, this hidden treasure, and how to honor the legacy that had been placed before him. The old man stirred in his chair, and Nolan looked up, meeting his eyes. "You've been quiet," the old man said, his voice raspy but filled with a quiet strength. "What are you thinking?" Nolan hesitated for a moment, then stood up and walked over to the window. The snow was still falling heavily, the world outside shrouded in white. He could see nothing but the endless stretch of trees, and it felt like the entire world had been covered in a blanket of cold. He turned back to the old man. "I don't know what to do with this," he said quietly, holding up the will. "It's a lot to take in." The old man nodded slowly, his eyes understanding. "I know it is, but you're the one who was meant to find it. My father believed in signs and fate. He knew that someone with the right heart would come along, someone who could carry this burden." Nolan walked back to the fire, kneeling beside it as he gazed into the flames. "I've spent so many years running away from things, from my past. Now I'm supposed to take on this responsibility? It's not a burden," the old man said, his voice firm. "It's an opportunity to change things, to make a difference." Nolan looked down at the will again, his mind racing with possibilities. What if he was the one who could do it? What if this was his chance to finally find a purpose beyond the battles he had fought? The storm outside seemed to be easing, but the storm inside Nolan's mind raged on. He had always believed that fate had a way of guiding people, but this was different. This wasn't just about him. It was about the land, about the legacy of the old man's family, and about what he could do with it. He knew that the land had been kept hidden for a reason, and that whatever was buried here, whatever treasure lay beneath the surface, wasn't just for him. It was for the future. "I'll do it," Nolan said, his voice steady. "I'll protect the land. I'll honor the legacy. I don't know exactly how, but I'll figure it out." The old man smiled, a look of relief and pride in his eyes. "I knew you had it in you. You've got the heart for it, and that's all that matters." Nolan stood up and looked out the window again, this time with a sense of resolve. The storm was clearing, the dark clouds breaking apart to reveal the faint light of dawn. For the first time in a long time, Nolan felt like he was on the right path. There was still much to be done, much to uncover, but he was no longer running. He was moving forward, ready to embrace the challenge ahead. The wind outside had died down, and the world beyond the cabin seemed to hold its breath. Nolan turned back to the old man. "What happens next?" he asked. "Next?" The old man chuckled softly. "Next, you begin the work. You'll need to uncover more than just the treasure. You'll need to understand the land, its history, and its purpose. But most importantly, you'll need to make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. People will want what's hidden here, but you have to make sure it stays protected for the right reasons." Nolan nodded, understanding the weight of the responsibility now. It was more than just treasure. It was about preserving something that had been built over generations, something that could change the course of many lives if it was used properly. "I won't let it fall into the wrong hands," he said firmly. "I promise." The old man smiled once more, his eyes glinting with approval. "I knew you were the right one." With that, Nolan stood up, feeling the weight of the task ahead of him, but also the sense of purpose that came with it. He had come here looking for peace, and now he had found something much greater, something that would require everything he had. But for the first time in a long while, Nolan felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. And with Ash by his side, he was ready to face whatever came next. The days passed slowly in the cabin, the storm outside having finally subsided, leaving a blanket of fresh snow across the landscape. Nolan had barely slept, his mind consumed by the weight of the promise he had made. The treasure, the land, the legacy, it all felt like too much, and yet, he could not ignore the responsibility now resting in his hands. The fire crackled steadily in the hearth as Nolan sat by the window, looking out over the snow-covered wilderness. Ash, ever vigilant, lay at his feet, the dog's amber eyes fixed on the doorway, alert to any sound or movement. The old man, who had been recovering from his ordeal, was still resting in his chair, a deep sleep having settled over him after the long, stressful day. But as Nolan gazed at the peaceful scene, a strange feeling settled in his chest. The cabin was quiet, the world beyond still and serene. But inside, Nolan felt the stirrings of something more, something hidden beneath the surface, like the land itself was calling to him. It was then that the old man stirred, his voice breaking the silence of the room. "It's time, isn't it?" he asked, his voice hoarse, but with a hint of urgency. Nolan turned toward him, nodding slowly. "Yeah," he replied, "it's time." The old man smiled faintly. "I knew you'd feel it. The land calls to those it chooses." Nolan looked at him, confused for a moment. "The land?" he asked. The old man nodded, his eyes half closed in thought. "Yes, it's not just the treasure that's important. It's the land itself. It has a purpose, a way of healing, of bringing balance. My father understood it. He knew that the right person would one day find it, and that person would carry it forward." Nolan stood up, his legs stiff from sitting too long. "I don't understand. What do you mean, the land has a purpose?" The old man slowly sat up, his frail body leaning forward as he spoke, his voice growing more focused. "The land holds more than just what's buried beneath it. It holds memories, power, stories. It's been passed down for generations, and every family that has cared for it has added something to it, whether through good or bad. The treasure is part of it, but the real value is in the connection, the history, and the responsibility of caring for it." Nolan's mind raced as he tried to process the old man's words. He had come to this cabin seeking peace, seeking escape from a life filled with loss and war. But now, he realized, his journey was far from over. There was so much more to this story, so much more to the land, to the legacy, to the promise he had made. "How do I even begin?" Nolan asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. The old man smiled, his eyes filled with a knowing sadness. "Start by understanding it. Walk the land, get to know its secrets. There are things hidden, things that can only be found through patience and care. And when you find them, you'll know what to do." Nolan nodded, though doubt still lingered in his mind. He had no idea where to begin or what he would find, but something deep inside him told him it was the right path. The old man's voice softened. "And remember, you're never alone in this. The land will guide you, just like it guided me, just like it guided my father." That night, Nolan stood outside the cabin, the cold air biting at his skin as he looked out over the snowy landscape. The moonlight glinted off the snow, casting an ethereal glow over the trees and the mountains in the distance. It was quiet, still, and peaceful, but Nolan could feel the pulse of something beneath the surface, a presence that had been waiting for him to arrive. He had no idea what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. The land was calling him, and he could not ignore it. The next morning, Nolan packed a small bag with the essentials, some water, a few snacks, a map, and a flashlight. Ash, ever loyal, stood by his side, ready for the journey. The old man had given him some direction, but the rest was up to Nolan. He didn't know what he was looking for or what he would find, but the sense of duty weighed heavily on him. As he walked out the door, the cabin behind him now felt like a distant memory. The land before him was wide open, filled with possibility and mystery. Nolan felt a chill run through him as he stepped into the snow. But there was something different now. A sense of purpose had taken root, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was running away from something. He was walking towards something, something greater than himself. Ash trotted ahead, his nose sniffing the air, his tail wagging slightly as he led the way. Nolan followed, the snow crunching beneath his boots, the the silence of the woods stretching out around him. He didn't know where the path would take him, but he was ready to find out. The further he walked, the more he could feel the land drawing him in, as though it was revealing its secrets one step at a time. There was a pull, a subtle connection that he couldn't quite explain. As they continued deeper into the forest, Nolan's thoughts drifted to the old man's words. The land had a purpose, a story to tell, and Nolan was ready to listen. The journey through the snow-covered forest felt endless, yet Nolan could not shake the feeling that he was getting closer to something important. As he and Ash moved deeper into the woods, the landscape began to shift. The trees grew denser, their branches heavy with snow, and the air seemed thicker, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Nolan adjusted the straps of his pack, the cold biting into his face as the wind picked up again. Ash trotted ahead, his nose constantly twitching, and every now and then, the dog would stop and look back at Nolan, as if waiting for him to catch up. The silence in the woods was profound, almost eerie, but there was something comforting about it, too. It was as though the land itself was guiding him, leading him to whatever he was meant to find. Nolan had always been someone who believed in signs and fate, but he had never felt something so powerful as this. This pull, this connection to the land, to the legacy that had been passed down through generations. The old man's words echoed in his mind. The land has a purpose. What did that really mean? Was it simply about the treasure, or was there something more, something deeper, that he was supposed to discover? As they continued, the terrain began to rise, and the path grew steeper. Nolan could feel his muscles straining, the weight of the pack a constant reminder of the journey he had undertaken. But he refused to stop. There was something ahead, something waiting to be found. After what felt like hours of hiking, they reached a small clearing. The trees opened up, and before them stood a structure. Old, weathered, but unmistakably a cabin. It wasn't large, but it had an air of permanence to it, as though it had been standing here for centuries, watching over the land. Ash ran ahead, his tail wagging as he circled the cabin, sniffing every corner with excitement. Nolan approached slowly, his heart racing. This had to be it, the place the old man had spoken of, the place that had been waiting for him. As he reached the front door, he hesitated. The wooden door was sturdy, its surface rough with age. Nolan reached for the handle and turned it, the creaking of the door sending a chill down his spine. Inside, the cabin was dark, the air cool but not as cold as the outside. A faint smell of dust and old wood filled the air, and the only sound was the crackling of a fire somewhere in the distance. Nolan stepped inside, Ash close behind him. The cabin was small but well kept. The furniture was simple, wooden chairs, a stone fireplace, and a large rug in the center of the room. There were shelves lined with books, jars, and old trinkets, each one seemingly holding a story of its own. But what caught Nolan's attention most was the large, intricately carved chest that stood against the far wall. It looked ancient, its surface covered in dust and cobwebs, but there was something about it that called to him. This was it, he thought. The treasure, or at least, the key to it, was here. He moved toward the chest, his fingers brushing against the smooth wood. As he reached for the lid, a low growl from Ash stopped him in his tracks. The dog stood at the door, his body tense, eyes fixed on something in the corner of the cabin. Nolan turned, his heart racing. There, in the shadowed corner, something caught his eye, an object, half hidden beneath a pile of old blankets. It was a small, wooden box, no larger than a shoebox, but it was the only thing in the room that seemed out of place. It looked almost as though it had been deliberately concealed. Nolan's curiosity piqued. He walked over to the box and gently picked it up. As soon as his fingers touched it, he felt a strange pulse of energy, something powerful, something alive. He placed it on the table and slowly opened it. Inside was a stack of old papers, yellowed with age. The top sheet was a letter, its ink faded but still legible. Nolan carefully unfolded it, reading the words aloud to himself. To the one who finds this, you have been chosen to continue the work we began. The land is not just ours, it belongs to all who will come after us. Protect it, nurture it, and you will find the true treasure that lies within. Nolan's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the legacy. The treasure wasn't gold, it wasn't silver, it was the land itself. And the work that the old man's family had started was still waiting to be completed. He could feel the weight of it now, the responsibility pressing down on him. This wasn't just about him. It was about the land, about the future, and about what he could do to protect it. As he stared at the letter, the words felt like a call to action. He had come here for peace, but now he understood. This was his purpose. The storm had passed, the path was clear, and the land was waiting for him to take the next step. He knew he couldn't do it alone, but with Ash by his side, and the legacy of the family guiding him, he was ready to face whatever came next. The land had a purpose, and Nolan was determined to fulfill it. The days following Nolan's discovery passed slowly, each one feeling heavier than the last. The weight of the responsibility he had taken on settled deeper within him, like a stone at the bottom of a lake. He had spent his life running from commitments, from promises, from anything that could tether him to the world. But now, standing on the threshold of something far bigger than himself, he knew there was no turning back. The letter, the family's legacy, the land, all of it was his to protect, his to understand. He had promised the old man he would honor this, and he would. He was already beginning to understand that this wasn't just about inheriting something tangible, something that could be measured in gold or land. It was about preserving the story, the essence of what had been built here, what had been passed down through the generations. The treasure wasn't buried in the earth. It was woven into the land itself, into the hearts of the people who had cared for it, loved it, and protected it for centuries. Nolan stood at the edge of the clearing, his gaze focused on the horizon. The cabin behind him was warm and welcoming, a temporary refuge from the storms that had passed. But the land ahead of him was vast, and with each step, he felt it pulling him deeper into its mysteries. Ash sat beside him, his tail wagging, eyes scanning the woods as though waiting for something, some sign of what was to come next. They had ventured out for days now, exploring the boundaries of the land, walking the paths that the old man had once known. But there was still something that called to Nolan, something hidden beneath the surface, something that was waiting to be found. Nolan had started to understand the land in a way he never thought possible. The old man's words resonated with him more each day. The land holds memories, power, stories. Every creak, every rustling leaf, every shifting shadow seemed to speak to him now, like the land was alive, waiting for him to uncover its secrets. He spent hours walking through the trees, his mind turning over the mysteries that lay before him. He had grown up hearing stories of ancient treasures, hidden gems, and forgotten riches, but none of that had prepared him for this. This wasn't about wealth. This was about the land's legacy, its connection to the people who had cared for it, nurtured it, and built their lives around it. He had promised the old man he would protect it, and now he had to prove that he could be the one to carry the torch forward. One afternoon, as the sun began to set and cast long shadows across the land, Nolan stood in front of a massive oak tree at the edge of the forest. This tree was different from the others. It was older, its bark scarred with age, its branches twisting upward like the arms of an ancient guardian. There was a faint glow in the air, a sense of something sacred, something powerful. Nolan felt it deep in his bones, a tugging sensation that pulled him closer to the tree. Ash barked sharply, his tail standing at attention, and Nolan walked forward, his boots crunching softly on the ground beneath him. As he neared the tree, he noticed something strange. The soil around its base was disturbed, as if someone had been digging there recently. Nolan knelt down, brushing away the loose dirt. His heart raced as he uncovered the edge of a stone. It was smooth and flat, covered in moss and soil, but it was unmistakable. This was no natural rock. This was a marker that had been hidden for generations. Nolan's fingers brushed against the stone, tracing its surface. As he did, he felt a deep hum, a vibration that seemed to come from the earth itself. It was as if the land was speaking to him, urging him to continue. He dug further, and as the last of the dirt was cleared away, he revealed what lay beneath. A small stone door, old and weathered, but still intact. This was it. This was the hidden secret the old man had spoken of. Nolan stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. The door was locked, of course, but it wasn't the kind of lock that could be opened by force. This was something different. This was a puzzle, a test. He took a deep breath and examined the stone door closely. There were markings etched into the surface, symbols that seemed familiar but alien at the same time. He recognized them as part of the family's history, symbols that had been passed down through the generations. The puzzle was a test, a way to prove his worthiness. Nolan's mind raced as he traced the symbols with his fingers, trying to decipher their meaning. He had no idea how long it took him, but as the sun began to dip below the horizon, he finally felt the puzzle click into place. A low rumble echoed through the ground as the stone door slowly began to shift. The earth beneath him trembled slightly, but the door creaked open, revealing what lay hidden inside. The room beyond was small, barely large enough for Nolan to stand up straight, but it was unlike anything he had ever seen. Shelves lined the walls, each one filled with ancient scrolls, books, and artifacts, things that had been left untouched for centuries. And in the center of the room, resting on a stone pedestal, was a chest. It was made of polished wood, with intricate carvings decorating its surface. Nolan approached it cautiously, his hands trembling as he reached out to lift the lid. Inside was not gold, not jewels, but something far more precious. A collection of maps, journals, and records that chronicled the land's history, its purpose, and the secrets it held. Nolan felt a deep sense of awe as he carefully pulled the first journal from the chest. The handwriting was old, but legible, and as he flipped through the pages, he realized that this was the legacy the old man had spoken of. This was what had been passed down through the generations, stories, memories, and knowledge that had been carefully preserved and hidden away for the right person to find. As Nolan sat there, surrounded by the history of the land, he understood for the first time what his purpose was. He wasn't just the protector of the land. He was its historian, its storyteller, its guardian. He was meant to preserve its secrets, to share its stories, and to ensure that its legacy lived on for generations to come. As the days wore on, Nolan continued to explore the hidden chamber beneath the old oak tree, each discovery revealing more about the legacy that had been passed down through generations. The journals he found in the chest were filled with stories and records of his ancestors, each one detailing the land's history, its connection to the earth, and the people who had lived here before him. It wasn't just about land. It was about the preservation of something far more significant. The stories, the culture, the spirit of those who had tended to this place. All of it was now his to carry forward. Nolan couldn't help but feel the weight of the task before him. But as each day passed, he grew more comfortable with his new role. Ash, his ever-loyal companion, remained by his side, offering quiet comfort in the solitude. The land was vast, and Nolan knew there was much work to be done. There were areas that still needed to be explored, secrets yet to be uncovered, and decisions that would determine the future of this place. One afternoon, while walking through the forest, Nolan came across a trail that was unfamiliar. It was narrow, winding, and seemed to lead toward the mountains in the distance. Curiosity tugged at him, and he decided to follow it. Ash, as always, was right behind him, his nose twitching at the sense of the forest. The trail led them to a clearing, and in the center, Nolan found a stone structure. It was small, almost hidden by the overgrowth of moss and vines, but unmistakably ancient. The stone walls were weathered and cracked, but the structure was still standing strong. Nolan's heart raced. This was another piece of the puzzle, another part of the land's history waiting to be uncovered. He approached the structure slowly, his hand running over the cool surface of the stone. There was an energy here, something old and powerful. The air felt different, almost charged. Ash whined softly at his side, his ears alert, but Nolan reassured him with a gentle pat. The door to the stone structure was partially open, and as Nolan stepped inside, he was greeted by the smell of old wood and earth. The interior was small but well kept, and as Nolan's eyes adjusted to the dim light, he saw that the walls were lined with shelves filled with ancient artifacts. There were tools, pottery, and various objects, many of which seemed to have been used for rituals or ceremonies. It was clear this place had been important to those who had come before him. In the center of the room, there was a large stone tablet. It was covered in symbols that Nolan recognized from the journals. These were the same markings that had been used to unlock the treasure chest in the cabin. He felt a sense of urgency, a pull, as if the land was guiding him to this very spot. He approached the tablet and ran his fingers over the symbols. They felt warm to the touch, as though the stone itself was alive. The more he touched them, the more the symbols seemed to come alive, shifting, and moving in ways that defied explanation. Nolan's heart raced as the stone tablet began to shift. With a low rumble, the surface of the tablet parted, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. Inside, Nolan found a small, weathered box. It was unlike the chest in the cabin. It was smaller, but the same sense of importance filled the air around it. He lifted the box carefully, his hands shaking with anticipation. Inside, he found something that left him speechless, a map. It was unlike any map Nolan had ever seen, drawn on a piece of parchment that was old but still intact. The map seemed to show a part of the land Nolan had never explored, an area deeper into the mountains, where the terrain became more rugged and treacherous. The map also marked a series of locations, each one accompanied by symbols Nolan had seen before, but they were unfamiliar in their meaning. It was clear now that the treasure, the true purpose of this land, lay far beyond what he had uncovered so far. This map was the key to understanding the full extent of the legacy he was meant to protect. The map was more than just a guide. It was a blueprint for what was to come. Nolan knew he had to follow it. He had to go to these locations, uncover the secrets hidden within them, and continue the work that had been started so many years ago. But he wasn't sure what he would find along the way. The land was vast, and every step he took seemed to reveal more mysteries than answers. Still, he felt a sense of certainty, as though the land itself was telling him he was on the right path. He folded the map carefully and tucked it into his bag. As he stood in the stone structure, he felt the weight of the decision before him. This was the moment that would change everything. There was no going back now. Ash stood by his side, looking up at him with those intelligent amber eyes. It was clear that Ash, too, understood the importance of this journey. The dog had always been more than a companion. He was a part of this legacy, just as much as Nolan was. Together, they would face whatever lay ahead. As Nolan stepped out of the stone structure and into the bright sunlight, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The journey wasn't over, it was just beginning. And with Ash by his side, he was ready to face whatever challenges awaited them in the mountains. The legacy of the land was now his responsibility, and he would stop at nothing to protect it. The days that followed were filled with a quiet sense of anticipation. Nolan had spent every waking moment studying the map, carefully memorizing the symbols and landmarks it revealed. Each day, he would walk further into the wilderness, trying to decipher the next clue. And yet, every time he felt he was on the verge of an answer, the land would seem to pull him in a new direction, always deeper, always more mysterious. Ash, ever vigilant, remained his constant companion, his presence grounding Nolan in a way nothing else could. The bond they shared, forged through years of hardship, now seemed to be a part of the very fabric of the land itself. It was as if they were both part of something greater, something beyond themselves. One crisp morning, as the air grew colder and the first hints of winter settled over the land, Nolan found himself standing at the edge of a cliff. Below him, a river twisted through the valley, its waters flowing fast and deep. The sound of the rushing water filled the air, blending with the faint whisper of the wind through the trees. It was beautiful, but Nolan knew this was no ordinary place. This was one of the spots marked on the map, one of the locations he had to reach. Ash stood at his side, looking down at the river, his ears perked, tail still. It was as if the dog, too, could feel the weight of what was to come. Nolan took a deep breath and began to climb down the cliffside. The rocks were slick with moisture, the jagged edges threatening to unbalance him, but he pressed on, determined to reach the river below. His muscles ached, and every step felt like a battle, but his mind stayed focused. He had no idea what awaited him at the river, but he knew it was part of the journey. Reaching the bottom, he was greeted by a small patch of land, the river roaring in front of him. The air smelled of fresh earth and water, and the ground beneath his feet was soft and wet. Ash trotted ahead, sniffing the air, his ears flicking at every noise. They stood there for a moment, the sound of the rushing river drowning out everything else. Then Nolan spotted something unusual, a large stone, half buried in the ground. It was rectangular, much larger than any stone he had seen before, and it seemed out of place. He walked over to it, his boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. Ash followed him, circling the stone, sniffing it curiously. As Nolan knelt down to examine the stone, his fingers brushed against something strange, an engraving. It was faint, nearly erased by time, but the symbols were unmistakable. They were the same as those on the map. This was it. The land was leading him here, just as it had guided him to every other location on the map. But this stone was different. It wasn't just a marker, it was a key. Nolan's pulse quickened as he traced the symbols with his fingers. He had no idea what they meant, but he knew they were important. Ash barked once, as though urging him on, and Nolan stood up, taking a step back. The river churned in front of him, the sound of the water intensifying. He needed to figure this out. As he stood there, staring at the stone, a memory came to him, the old man's words. The land has a purpose. It will reveal itself when the time is right. Nolan didn't understand it all yet, but he was starting to. The stone was a part of it, a piece of the puzzle that would unlock the next step in the journey. He glanced back at the river, feeling a pull toward the water. Maybe there was something hidden beneath it. Maybe the stone was a marker for something deeper. As he pondered this, Ash began barking excitedly, drawing Nolan's attention. The dog had moved further downstream and was now standing at the water's edge, his tail wagging. Nolan's heart skipped a beat. He walked over to the dog, his boots crunching against the gravel beneath him. When he reached Ash, the dog stepped aside, revealing something half-submerged in the riverbank. It was another stone, larger than the first, with similar engravings running across its surface. This one was different, though. It wasn't just a stone. It had a strange indentation in the center, a circular shape that seemed to fit perfectly with the markings on the first stone. Nolan's breath caught in his throat. This was it, the second piece of the puzzle. The two stones fit together, but the key was still missing. He couldn't explain it, but he knew that the answer was close. He couldn't help but wonder if the map had been leading him here, not just to uncover the secrets of the land, but to understand its deeper meaning. The legacy wasn't just about protecting the land. It was about unlocking its potential, understanding its purpose, and carrying it forward. Nolan placed the first stone beside the second one, their engravings aligning perfectly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low rumble, the stones shifted slightly, and the ground beneath Nolan's feet trembled. He took a step back, watching as the stones began to glow faintly, their edges lighting up with a soft, golden light. It was as though the land itself was responding to their presence. Ash barked again, his tail wagging furiously. Nolan watched in awe as the light grew brighter, and the symbols on the stones began to shift. It was as if the land was awakening, revealing its secrets to him, just as it had been passed down through generations. Nolan stood there for a moment, taking it all in, before the light slowly faded, leaving the stones once again dark and still. But the message was clear. He had uncovered the first part of the land's legacy, and now he had to carry it forward. The journey was far from over. There were more pieces to find, more steps to take, and Nolan knew that with Ash by his side, he was ready for whatever lay ahead. The days following the discovery of the glowing stones were filled with a sense of anticipation. Nolan couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental was coming, something that would finally reveal the true purpose of his journey. He and Ash continued to explore the land, but each step seemed to only deepen the mystery, pushing them forward with a force Nolan could not ignore. They returned to the stone structure by the river, the one that had revealed its secrets to them only days before. This time, Nolan was not alone in his thoughts. The light from the stones still lingered in his mind, and he could feel their presence guiding him towards something important. The map had led him this far, and now it seemed to beckon him to continue. Each symbol on the map was now more than just an image to be decoded. It was a challenge, an invitation to uncover more about the land's power and purpose. But the journey had become more than just about following the map. Nolan realized that he was now a part of something larger, something far beyond just protecting the land. He was meant to unlock its secrets, to understand its legacy, and to share that with the world. It was a responsibility, and one that weighed heavily on him. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the air grew denser, the trees taller and thicker, as if they were guarding the secrets within. It was quiet, too quiet, and Nolan couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. He glanced at Ash, who walked with an almost supernatural alertness, his amber eyes scanning every movement. The dog's instincts had always been sharp, but now, Nolan wondered if they were being guided by something greater. They followed the map, each location leading them further into the unknown. But there was one place on the map that called to Nolan more than the others. It was a spot deep in the heart of the forest, marked by a symbol he had seen before, the same symbol etched on the stone tablet. The path to this location was difficult, the terrain rougher than anything they had encountered so far, but Nolan was determined to reach it. He knew this was the final piece of the puzzle. After several hours of trekking through thick underbrush, they arrived at a small clearing, and in the center stood an ancient oak tree. It was massive, its trunk wide and gnarled, and its roots seemed to stretch out like arms, grasping the earth beneath it. The air around the tree was thick with energy, as if the tree itself was alive, watching, waiting. Nolan approached the tree slowly, Ash by his side. He could feel the pull of the tree, its presence powerful, and he couldn't help but reach out and place his hand against its bark. The moment his fingers made contact, a sharp jolt ran through him. A surge of energy, like electricity, flowed from the tree and into his body. He gasped, pulling his hand back, but the sensation lingered. It was as if the tree had recognized him, as though it had accepted him as its protector. Ash barked sharply, his body stiff with tension, but Nolan could feel the dog's unease, the way the hair along his back stood on end. The dog had always been able to sense danger, but now Nolan wondered if it wasn't just danger they were sensing. It was something deeper, something tied to the land itself. He took a deep breath, steadying himself, and turned back to the tree. There, in the roots, was something new, something that hadn't been there before. A small stone, half buried in the soil, gleamed in the dim light. Nolan knelt down and carefully unearthed the stone, its surface smooth and cold to the touch. It was unlike any stone he had found so far. Its markings were similar to the ones on the other stones, but this one was different. It seemed more intricate, more detailed, as though it held a deeper meaning. Nolan's pulse quickened as he studied it. The symbols on the stone seemed to shift, the lines and shapes bending in ways that were impossible. As if responding to his touch, the symbols rearranged themselves, forming a map that led to a new destination, a place Nolan hadn't seen before. This was the final location, the last piece of the puzzle. Nolan stood up, the stone still in his hand, and looked around the clearing. Everything had changed. The journey was no longer just about finding answers. It was about completing the legacy, understanding the purpose of the land, and unlocking its final secret. He glanced down at Ash, who seemed to sense the shift as well, his posture more relaxed now, his tail wagging slightly. They weren't just walking into the unknown anymore. They were walking into the heart of it, where everything would be revealed. With the stone in his hand and the map leading the way, Nolan turned toward the path that lay ahead. There was no going back now. The land had chosen him, and he would not stop until he had uncovered its final secret. The trees seemed to part before him, the path opening up as if it knew exactly where he was going. Nolan felt the weight of the stone in his hand, the responsibility of what it represented. This was more than just a journey. It was the completion of a story that had been unfolding for generations. With Ash at his side, Nolan took the first step, the future of the land resting in his hands. The path ahead was steep, the ground rugged, but Nolan pressed on, his determination unwavering. The map, now folded and tucked safely in his jacket, led them deeper into the heart of the forest. With Ash by his side, the bond between man and dog felt as unbreakable as the ancient trees surrounding them. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth, and despite the weight of his task, Nolan couldn't help but feel a deep sense of peace here, as if the land was acknowledging him, recognizing him as its protector. The journey had brought him this far, and now it felt like it was guiding him towards something monumental, something that would change everything. The stone he had found at the oak tree still felt warm in his hand, the symbols that had shifted and reformed etched into his memory. The light from the stones had faded, but their pull remained, like a quiet hum beneath the surface of the world. Ash's behavior had changed as well. He moved with a purpose now, his nose twitching at every sound, his ears constantly alert. Nolan could feel the dog's instincts leading them forward, just as they had so many times before in the past. There was no doubt in his mind that Ash knew something he didn't. As the day wore on, the terrain became more challenging. The forest seemed to thicken around them, the trees growing taller and the underbrush denser. Nolan found himself pushing through the heavy ferns, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He could feel the weight of the stone pressing against his chest, as if it were urging him forward. Finally, after what felt like hours of hiking, they reached a plateau, a clearing with a breathtaking view of the valley below. The wind howled through the trees, and Nolan could see the distant mountain peaks on the horizon. This was the spot, the map had led him here, and now it felt like the land itself was offering its final test. In the center of the clearing stood a massive stone archway, its surface covered in moss and vines. It looked ancient, as though it had been standing here for centuries, waiting for someone to pass through. Nolan approached it slowly, his heart racing with anticipation. Ash barked once, his tail stiff, his body poised for whatever was to come next. Nolan reached out and placed his hand on the archway, the stone cold to the touch. The moment his fingers made contact, a jolt of energy shot through him, and the ground beneath him seemed to shift. The archway began to glow faintly, the symbols on the stone flaring to life, just as they had with the stones by the river. Nolan took a step back, his breath catching in his throat. He had known this moment would come, but the reality of it was overwhelming. This was it, the final step. As he stood there, trying to steady his nerves, a deep, rumbling voice seemed to echo through the air, though it did not come from any person. "You have come far, but your journey is not yet complete," the voice said. Nolan's heart raced as he looked around, but he saw no one. The voice seemed to come from the very earth beneath his feet, resonating through the stone. "What must I do?" Nolan asked, his voice trembling slightly. There was a long pause before the voice answered. "You must choose. The land is not just for one to possess. It is for all to share. Your role is not to take from it, but to give, to nurture what has been entrusted to you." The words felt heavy, as if they were both a warning and an invitation. Nolan's mind raced. The responsibility he had taken on was greater than he could have ever imagined. The treasure, the land, the legacy, they were not just for him. They were meant for the world. He was not meant to possess them, but to protect them, to ensure that they were used for the good of all. The weight of the decision settled deep within him, and Nolan knew that this was the moment that would define his future. The archway's glow began to fade as the voice spoke once more. "The path is yours to walk, but remember, the land's legacy is not yours alone to carry. You must share it, protect it, and honor it." With those final words, the glow of the archway disappeared, leaving the stone surface cold once more. Nolan stood there for a long moment, absorbing the weight of what he had just learned. The land was not just a physical place. It was a living, breathing entity, one that had been passed down through the generations, and now it was his responsibility to protect it. But the true treasure was not in the stone or the land itself. It was in the choice he had to make. Nolan looked down at Ash, who was sitting quietly at his feet, his eyes calm and knowing. The dog had been with him through every step of this journey, and now, more than ever, Nolan realized that he was not alone in this. He had a purpose, to protect the land, to share its gifts, and to carry its legacy forward. He had come to this place seeking answers, but now he understood that the true answer was within him all along. It wasn't about ownership. It was about stewardship, about ensuring that the land would be preserved for those who came after him. The journey was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, and Nolan knew that he would have to make difficult decisions. But for the first time in a long while, he felt at peace with the path ahead. The land had chosen him, not because of what he could take, but because of what he could give. With Ash by his side, Nolan turned toward the horizon, ready to walk the path laid out before him. The legacy of the land was his to protect, and he would do so with everything he had. The days following Nolan's realization felt different, as though the very air around him had shifted. The weight of the decision he had made, the responsibility he had accepted, seemed to settle deep within his chest. Every morning, he awoke with a sense of purpose, yet the enormity of what lay ahead was not lost on him. The legacy of the land was now his to protect, but it wasn't just about the land. It was about the people, the stories, and the future that depended on the choices he made. He had thought the journey would be over once he uncovered the last piece of the puzzle, but it had only just begun. The map, the stones, the symbols, they were all just pieces of the story. The real challenge lay in how to carry it forward. He knew now that the land had a purpose, a story to tell, and it was his job to ensure that it wasn't lost. He wasn't alone in this, though. Ash, his loyal companion, remained by his side, ever vigilant, always ready. There was no one else Nolan would rather have with him on this journey. Together, they had already overcome so much. The forest around them was vast and filled with mysteries, but Nolan felt a sense of peace knowing that he was walking the path that had been set for him. One afternoon, after several days of traveling deeper into the land, Nolan found himself at the edge of a vast field. It stretched out before him, dotted with wildflowers and grasses that swayed in the breeze. The landscape was serene, but there was something almost magical about the place, as if it held a secret, one that was waiting to be uncovered. Ash stopped beside him, his ears perked, and for a moment, the two of them stood in silence, taking in the beauty of the land. Nolan's heart swelled with a deep sense of connection to this place. This was what he had come for, the chance to protect something greater than himself, to ensure that it would remain for generations to come. As they made their way across the field, Nolan noticed something in the distance. A small, weathered building that seemed to have been there for centuries. It was an old barn, its wood gray and chipped from years of exposure to the elements. The barn stood alone, but there was something about it that drew Nolan closer. He could feel it calling to him. Ash barked once and ran ahead, tail wagging, and Nolan followed, eager to discover what awaited them. When they reached the barn, Nolan pushed open the door. It creaked on its hinges, the sound echoing in the stillness. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of old hay, but there was something else, something more. In the corner of the barn, partially covered by a pile of old crates, was a large wooden chest. It was similar to the one he had found in the stone structure, but this one was different. It was larger, more ornate, and its surface was carved with intricate designs. Nolan approached it cautiously, his heart racing with anticipation. This was it, another clue, another step forward in his journey. He knelt down and carefully pried open the chest. Inside, there were no jewels or treasures, but something far more valuable, more journals. Each one was carefully bound, the pages yellowed with age, but the handwriting was still clear. These were the journals of the land's previous caretakers, those who had come before him. As he flipped through the pages, Nolan felt a deep sense of awe. The journals contained not just stories, but wisdom, knowledge, and guidance. They detailed the land's history, its purpose, and the role that the caretakers had played in its preservation. It was clear now that this wasn't just about protecting the land. It was about understanding it, nurturing it, and ensuring that its legacy continued. The journals spoke of times when the land had been threatened, when those who had come before had fought to keep it safe from those who sought to exploit it. It was a reminder that the land had a story to tell, one that needed to be passed on, just as it had been passed to Nolan. He couldn't do it alone, though. He would need help. Help from those who understood the land, its history, and its purpose. But the journals also contained something else, maps, drawings, and symbols that Nolan recognized. They were similar to those on the map he had been following, but these were more detailed. These maps marked places of significance, locations that would help him understand the true power of the land. With each page he turned, Nolan felt as though the land was revealing itself to him, piece by piece, offering up its secrets and its wisdom. The path was becoming clearer. He knew that there was still much work to be done. There were places he had yet to explore, challenges he had yet to face, and decisions he had yet to make. But for the first time since he had arrived, Nolan felt confident. He understood the responsibility that had been entrusted to him, and he was ready to carry it forward. The barn, the journals, the land, it was all part of the same story, a story that was now his to tell. As the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the field, Nolan stood up and looked out over the land. It was vast and beautiful, full of promise. And now, with the journals in his hands, he knew that the legacy of the land was in good hands. He had found his place, his purpose, and with Ash at his side, he was ready to protect it. The journey was far from over, but Nolan knew that he was no longer walking it alone. The weeks that followed were filled with a quiet, steady rhythm. Nolan and Ash had established a routine. Every morning, they ventured out into the land, following the directions and the clues from the journals they had uncovered. With each step, the legacy of the land seemed to grow stronger, its purpose clearer. Nolan had come to understand that his role wasn't just to protect the land, but to be its voice, its steward. The journals had shown him not only the history of the land, but also the delicate balance that had to be maintained. It wasn't about keeping it hidden away or controlling it. It was about nurturing it, understanding it, and ensuring it would endure for future generations. Nolan had learned much from the journals, but perhaps the most important lesson was the land's ability to heal, to offer what it had to those who truly understood it. The land was a gift, and now it was his to care for. As autumn descended upon the land, turning the trees into a patchwork of reds, yellows, and oranges, Nolan felt a sense of peace he had never known before. The weight of the responsibility was still there, but it no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a purpose he had been meant for all along. On a crisp morning, with the air smelling of fallen leaves and the earth growing colder, Nolan stood at the edge of a hill overlooking the valley below. The sun had just risen, casting its warm light over the landscape, and for a moment, everything seemed still, as if the land itself was holding its breath. He could see the cabin in the distance, nestled among the trees, its chimney sending a thin plume of smoke into the sky. He had made it a home, a place of refuge. But more than that, it was a symbol of his commitment to the land. As he stood there, taking in the beauty of the valley, Ash padded up beside him and sat at his feet, his fur ruffling in the breeze. They had walked this path together, side by side, for so long now that it felt as though they were one. The dog's presence was constant, grounding him, reminding him that he was never truly alone. And with that thought, Nolan realized that the journey had come full circle. He had started this path searching for peace, running away from his past, and now he was standing here, a part of something far greater than himself. The land had chosen him, and he had chosen it in return. He wasn't running anymore. The weight of his role, the responsibility to protect the land, was still there, but it no longer felt overwhelming. It was something he was ready for. As the day unfolded, Nolan continued to walk the land. He visited the places marked on the map, ensuring that the legacy of the land was protected, that the natural balance was preserved. He had learned that his task wasn't to control the land, but to listen to it, to understand it, and to protect its future. With each passing day, Nolan felt a deeper connection to the earth beneath his feet, to the trees that towered above him, and to the animals that roamed the forest. This was his home now, a place where he had found not just purpose, but belonging. And he would protect it with everything he had. Over time, the local people began to hear of the man who lived in the valley, the one who had saved the land and nurtured it back to health. They came to him with questions, with requests for help, and over time, Nolan became a figure of respect and guidance. He didn't seek fame, but the land had a way of drawing people to it, and Nolan was more than willing to share the lessons he had learned. He taught them about the land's history, about its power, and about the importance of stewardship. Slowly, the community began to understand, and they worked together to ensure that the land was protected for future generations. In the quiet of the evenings, when the fire crackled and the stars lit up the night sky, Nolan would sit on the porch of his cabin, Ash by his side, and reflect on everything he had accomplished. There were still challenges ahead, still mysteries to uncover, but he had learned that the journey wasn't just about reaching an end. It was about the process, about what he learned along the way. The legacy of the land was not just in the treasures hidden beneath it, but in the stories, the memories, and the people who cared for it. As the years passed, Nolan continued his work, the land becoming a symbol of healing, of growth, and of community. He had come to understand that it was never just about one person. It was about all of them, working together to protect something far greater than themselves. He wasn't the sole keeper of the land, but a part of its greater story, one that would continue long after he was gone. And as he stood in the fields, looking out over the land he had come to love, Nolan knew that he had found his true home. He had found his purpose. With Ash at his side, he had unlocked the greatest treasure of all, connection, peace, and the knowledge that he was part of something that would live on, a legacy that would endure through time.